It's time to talk about my favorite guilty pleasure, The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, whose third season just came out, and the reunion was actually aired this past week. Now, this season was absolutely wild. From affairs to SA allegations to rumors of divorce to jealousy among the women. And also, although this TV show claims to be smashing the patriarchy, we saw more and more from the husbands and male partners of the women. Storylines that a lot of people who watch the show aren't that interested in. Now, this show is, I'll admit, a guilty pleasure of mine. And it might come across that this video is going to be a little bit snarky, but unfortunately for all of us, it's going to get very serious. Because in the reunion that aired this week, there were so many accusations of SA from multiple women. Accusations from when they were teenagers or even younger. And it got me and several other netizens wondering, what is going on within the Mormon church where so many women are getting taken advantage of in this way? What is going on? So today we are going to explore all of this as well as the larger societal issue of why women in general are always such targets. And we'll discuss the role purity culture has in protecting men from having to take any accountability for how they treat women. Today is going to be a lot, and I'm so grateful that you are here for the ride. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, true crime, and unique spiritual practices. I post about 3 videos every single week on one of these topics, from reaction videos to real life cult stories to deep dives like this. So if you're into that sort of thing, please consider subscribing. I would absolutely love to have you here. Now, throughout the month of December, I am featuring a different single parent on my channel. They've emailed me their story and their Amazon wish list, so I'm going to share that story with you and post the Amazon wish list down in the pinned comment below. Today's mom is Lauren. Hey Erin, I've been watching your videos for over a year now, and one of my favorite things about your channel is how you use your platform to help those in need. Thank you so much for watching for so long, too. Of course, I also love hearing about all things cult and unique spiritual practices, too, but your genuine empathy for others is what keeps me coming back. That's really sweet. Thank you. I've been debating on whether or not to ask for help this year for my son's Christmas gifts. On one hand, I feel like there are probably other people with a greater need than us. I'm lucky to be able to put a roof over our heads and food in our tummies, and I recognize that not all single moms are able to do so in these tough times. I've never been great at accepting help either, but what made me send this is that I know my son deserves so much more than I'm able to give him this year, and closed mouths don't get fed. So true. My son and I survived a DV situation with his birth father that nearly became fatal in 2018. I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, he and I both were diagnosed with PTSD because of this. We spent a year living in an RV trying to get back on our feet, and times were so incredibly difficult. Since then, we have come a long way, but it's still a financial struggle. Due to my son Aiden being on the autism spectrum and in a variety of extracurricular activities, I'm only able to work part time outside of the house. I also do pet sitting and dog walking on the side, but it seems like the cost of everything keeps rising and my income remains the same. I feel a bit selfish asking for help when I know there are people much worse off than us, but Aiden is such a kind and wonderful 11-year-old boy, and he deserves so much more than I'm able to give him this year. So I'm swallowing my pride and asking for help for his sake. A little bit about Aiden. He's in 5th grade this year. He plays soccer, basketball, and baseball. He's in his 2nd year of the advanced orchestra at school. He loves all animals, especially cats, and started what he called his cicada saving group at recess last year when he saw other boys hurting them by pulling their wings off. Oh, that's so sweet. How dare those boys? That's psychotic. He has helped me volunteer with stray bunnies at the Emo House Rabbit Society. He loves video games. He loves to read the Warrior Cat book series by Aaron Hunter and any books by Rick Riordan, the author of the Percy Jackson books. And he's been working so hard with his therapist the last few years to regulate his emotions, handle his sensory needs, and work through autistic shutdowns and meltdowns. He's my favorite person in the world who has the strength and kindness of a superhero. I'd move mountains for him if he needed me to. I'm honestly not expecting to be featured. Part of me also feels like I don't deserve help. But I figure that it's worth my pride on the off chance that my amazing son gets a better Christmas than I'm capable of providing right now. Either way, I love your videos and I'm deeply moved by your kindness and authenticity. Thank you for using your large platform to help single moms and their kids. I wish more content creators had your heart. Wow, thank you. Oh my gosh. The amount of times you said you don't think you deserve it, my mom was a lot like that too. It was really hard for her to ask for help if she even did. And she just worked herself silly. And now that me and my brother are out of the house, she just like is still in that momentum where she just like never ever stops working. And there are times, and, shout out mom if you watch this, but like there are times where I'm like, just slow down. I'd rather spend time with you than you to keep feeling like you have to do all these things all of the time. I just want to have like a positive, fun, loving relationship with you. But she's still in this mentality of like, I have to work, I have to provide, I have to work, I have to work, even though, me and my brother aren't dependent on her anymore. So I just want to say thank you for reaching out and asking for help. I know that connecting with your child is the best form of support you can give them, regardless if there's any money involved at all. I'm sure your son is going to be so happy, even if you weren't able to provide him gifts for Christmas. But hopefully, we can help you give him the boost that he might need and maybe even that you might need. So, thank you again so much for writing in your story. If you'd like to support Lauren, please check out that pinned comment down below. So, now let's explore the history of women and misogyny within the Mormon Church. Because seriously, what is going on in that place? Now, I want to first address that statistically in the United States, 1 in 5 women have been essayed by the time they are 25 years old. So we're just going to let that sink in a little bit. And thanks to the secrecy of the Mormon Church, there are no statistics regarding how many women are being essayed in this cult. And don't worry, we're going to break all of it down from how the cult not just silences women, but discourages women from speaking up or even blames women for the bad things that happen to them. And like I said in my intro, when I was watching the Secret Lives of Mormon Wives reunion, I was like, this is really crazy. Not only is almost every single woman on this stage saying that they were essayed, but they're saying it on a international platform where it's going to make people question what is going on within the Mormon church. Now, like I said, the national average in America is 1 in 5 women being essayed before the age of 25. But in Utah, that number jumps to 1 in 3 women. So one can infer that since Utah is the capital of the Mormon cult, that many of those women are most likely Mormon. Now, if you want more deep dives, I've done them on LDS, FLDS. I've done several updates. I will be linking them up top throughout the video, and I will try to remember to drop them down in the description below. But in today's video, I want to go through the entire history and how the Mormon Church actually flip-flopped from being a little more progressive in the feminine movement to totally doing a 180 and flipping the script and basically pushing women down. Now, from the beginning, the story of women in the LDS Church has been shaped by this paradox. They are exalted in doctrine, but they are totally diminished in governance. They're publicly praised, yet systematically muted when their experiences challenge authority. This is a tension that's kind of woven through nearly 2 centuries of theology, community structure, and also cultural expectation. And nowhere is this tension more visible or more consequential than in the church's response to women's accusations, whether the accusation is about abuse, inequity, or institutional failure, that pattern is consistent. Women may speak, but only within certain channels that are controlled by men and only in ways that do not disrupt the institution's preferred narrative. And this goes all the way back to the earliest days of Mormonism, where spiritual empowerment for women was offered with one hand, but then withheld with the other. So let's go back in time, like almost a couple hundred years. In 1842, Joseph Smith, the founder and president of the cult, created the Female Relief Society of Nauvoo, declaring that he was, quote, turning the key to women. It was essentially this women's group, and it would be led by a woman who was elected. But somehow this ended up being this man's wife, Emma Hale Smith. Are we surprised that the wife of the president started leading the women's group? Not at all. But early Relief Society sisters would bless the sick. They actually would prophesize, despite Secret Lives of Mormon wives saying that the priesthood could only be held by men. But again, this is almost 200 years ago, and it's really sad to hear that maybe things were a little more progressive in the 1800s than they are today in 2025 within the church. It just blows your mind. But after Joseph Smith's death 2 years later, Brigham Young, the new LDS president, suspended the society entirely, calling women's meetings dangerous and portraying any independent female organization as a threat. He would then say that women can never hold the priesthood apart from their husbands. So, whatever proto priesthood role Joseph may have envisioned for that woman's group was now just diminished. Young would eventually allow the organization to restart in Utah in the 1850s and 1860s, but it was firmly under male direction and without the independent authority that Joseph's words had initially implied. Now, this moment in history established a pattern that has echoed across LDS history. Women may be granted spiritual authority, but only when it serves the needs of male leaders, and it can be revoked at the moment it appears independent. So that made all of women's power conditional, temporary, and always subject to male approval. And the same logic underlies the church's modern response to accusations. Women's voices are welcomed in controlled contexts like testimonies, lessons, and expressions of faith. But when women speak truths that reflect poorly on the institution, their voices are reclassified as disorderly or causing dissent. The instinct to contain women's speech is not modern, it's foundational to the church itself. Now, you're not going to believe this, but in the late 1800s, Mormon women became some of the earliest suffrage advocates in the United States. They published their own newspaper, the Woman's Exponent, and they even spoke before Congress. They appeared to be empowered and formidable, and most importantly, united. Yet this empowerment existed because it was just there to defend the institution of Mormonism itself. Their advocacy served church interests primarily, like the defense of plural marriage. Well, if the women want to have only one husband and they all get to be sister wives, why not let it happen? They're all consenting adults. Yeah, but they're led by these men almost being coerced into sharing their opinion. Now, when women's voices aligned with church goals, they were amplified, but when they diverged, instead they would be suppressed. But still, Mormon women in the 19th century were far from passive bystanders. Paradoxically, the same era that brought plural marriage also produced empowered, outspoken LDS women. So it was in the 1940s when church leaders introduced polygamy as a religious principle, requiring tremendous sacrifice from women who were asked to share their husbands. Now, some early Mormon women embraced plural marriage as a divine calling and defended it on that national stage in Congress. Now, in the Utah Territory, where the LDS Church dominated society, many polygamous wives became champions of women's rights. These were polygamist wives. In 1870, Utah's legislature, which was dominated by Mormon men, granted women the right to vote, making Utah women among the first in the United States to cast ballots in official elections. Notably, women like Emmeline B. Wells and Eliza R. Snow would leverage their literacy and leadership to advocate both for the church and for women's causes. Wells, who would later serve as the 5th General Relief Society president, represented Utah at national suffrage conventions and rubbed shoulders with people like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. For 37 years, from 1877 to 1914, Emmeline B. Wells was editor of that newspaper, The Woman's Exponent, which was a Salt Lake City-based periodical totally run by women, which championed female empowerment and recorded women's voices. Through the Exponent, Mormon women declared their support for suffrage and even critiqued male church leaders at times, all while reaffirming faith in the gospel. Now, the tension between deference to a patriarchal church and advocacy for women's equality would define these pioneers' lives. When the U.S. federal government cracked down on polygamy in the 1880s with the Edmunds-Tucker Act, it stripped Utah women of the vote, which was viewed as a blow to Mormon political power. Leading LDS women would fight back. They organized indignation meetings, signed petitions, and would even travel to testify to Congress that Mormon plural wives were not oppressed victims, but autonomous, educated women. Their efforts bore fruit when Utah would attain statehood in 1896 and enshrined women's suffrage in its constitution. So these are like incredible suffrage victories. Yay, feminism. But unfortunately, the lines between feminism and a patriarchal structure are being totally blurred. Because even as they celebrated these victories, Mormon women remained bound by the structures of their church. After the official end of polygamy in 1890 and into the early 20th century, the LDS hierarchy increasingly emphasized a one husband, one wife family model with very distinct gender roles. Women were venerated as wives and mothers. They were called queens and priestesses in sacred temple ceremonies, but they were also clearly subservient to male priesthood holders in church governance. In 1880, the church's president, John Taylor, who had helped ordain the very first Relief Society leaders in 1842, publicly clarified all confusion. He would say, "It is not of the calling of these sisters to hold the priesthood, only in connection with their husbands," clarified any confusion, basically saying, no, they're not called to hold the priesthood. They only get close to that honor by being one with their husbands. So that interpretation became the official doctrine. A woman could enjoy those priesthood blessings and even participate in temple rituals and perform healing blessings by faith, but only through the authority of her husband or male priesthood leaders, not independently, because a woman who's independent is scary. And we see this in the series Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. We see it in season 1 where Whitney has a baby and she wants to do a baby blessing, and all of the men pray over the baby. None of the women are allowed to pray over the baby. And we see it in the most recent season as well when Taylor wants to do something very similar. She wants to have a baby blessing, but her and her baby daddy Dakota are on the outs. So she's not allowed to give God's blessing to her son because her father didn't approve and wanted nothing to do with the event. It just seems super backwards. I mean, it's not like women, compromise their body and their lives to bring life into this earth or anything, but only men hold. Yeah, makes total sense. Now, by the turn of the 20th century, women's earlier spiritual gifts, such as laying on hands to heal, were increasingly viewed with doubt by male authorities. And over the next few decades, the church quietly phased out female administered healing ordinances entirely. Now, in short, the founding area of Mormonism planted these two seeds regarding women's status, one of empowerment and one of patriarchy. Both would continue to grow in the following century, but often in tension. Now, the mid-20th century marked the most dramatic shift in women's institutional status through a bureaucratic initiative called correlation, the church centralized curriculum, budgeting, decision making, and oversight all under male priesthood bodies. Before correlation, the Relief Society operated semi independently, controlling its own publications, finances, and welfare projects. But after correlation, it would become an auxiliary, subordinate, scripted, and dependent enterprise. With this restructuring, women lost every structural mechanism that could have enabled oversight of male leaders or independent handling of accusations. Relief Society presidents could no longer publish anything without male approval. They couldn't investigate their own members' welfare concerns or participate in any disciplinary councils. Their organizational autonomy evaporated. Additionally, correlation also laid the administrative groundwork for the church's modern system of managing allegations. Centralized reporting lines, strict confidentiality, hierarchical decision making, and an increasing reliance on church attorneys all originated in this era. So, by removing women from the conversation and all decision making at every level, the church ensured that no woman could influence how accusations, especially accusations made by women, would be handled. While the institutional structure was shifting, the cult's cultural teachings created a psychological environment in which women were primed to silence themselves long before the institution even needed to intervene. For generations, LDS girls were taught that modesty was a moral imperative, that chastity was the defining measure of their worth, and that sexual sin, even involuntary sexual encounters, could stain them irrevocably. Lessons used metaphors like chewing gum, wilted flowers, or damaged wood to describe girls who lost their virtue. Spencer W. Kimball's writings suggested that a woman's purity was so precious that death might be preferable to its loss. Yeah, yeah. Dying is better than having intercourse before marriage. That's insane. So, this deeply internalized purity culture blurred the line between victimhood and sin. Women who were abused often reported feeling like they had participated in the wrongdoing simply because they were there, or they were breaking curfew, or they were being caught in a context perceived as inappropriate. At BYU, Brigham Young University, the Mormon university in Utah, women who reported R word were, until 2016, routinely investigated for honor code violations, and this only reinforced the belief that they were guilty of something, not the man who victimized them. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it begins in childhood lessons about modesty, it blossoms in adolescence through teachings about virtue, and it solidifies in adulthood through ecclesiastical interactions that just reinforce deference, obedience, and self blame. By the time a Latter day Saints woman discloses any, she often does so with her voice already trembling, not simply from trauma, but from a lifetime of being taught that speaking certain truths is spiritually dangerous, knowing that she is going to be blamed for it. And even more enraging and saddening, she might believe that she's to blame. I feel like this makes it so difficult for a woman to even identify that she's been SA'd, because then she would have to also grapple with the fact that it's her fault simultaneously. And how do you break that down, especially as a young woman who's been indoctrinated since most likely her birth into believing that any missteps, or basically when you've been conditioned that any missteps and even offensives against you actioned by men is actually your fault. That's why so much of this goes unreported, it's minimized, or even reframed within the LDS Church. Now, we have to examine these three systems within the church that kind of interplay with each other, that kind of promote this ideology, but also keep women from speaking out. We have the cultural, the ecclesiastical, and the legal. Each of these systems shapes women's voices, and together They create this almost airtight environment in which allegations rarely escape a woman's. So, one, we have purity culture and the self silencing of women's trauma. So, when Mormon feminist movements began surfacing again in the early 2000s and 2010s, something deeper started to come into focus. Women's experiences of SA in the church were not rare or isolated. They were woven into the very fabric of LDS teachings about womanhood, girlhood, and morality. Across thousands of survivor accounts, interviews, and testimonies, one pattern repeats itself. Mormon women were conditioned to blame themselves. A teenage girl assaulted while breaking curfew concluded that she had sinned. A young woman R-worded by her boyfriend believed that she'd allowed it because she stayed at his apartment for too long. Girls groped at youth activities apologized for their outfits. A BYU student who reported R word found herself summoned, shockingly, not to a trauma support office, but to the honor code office where her behavior was under investigation. But this is how purity culture narrows a woman's moral universe. Harm becomes indistinguishable from personal failure. Violation becomes participation. Victimhood becomes sin. And this is where that conditioning begins. From earliest childhood, LDS girls are taught that their worth is tied to their modesty and sexual purity. Virtue, that word that is used far more frequently for girls and boys, and it's framed not as integrity or courage, but as sexual untouchedness. Entire lessons revolve around avoiding unclean thoughts, resisting boys' advances, and covering their bodies so as not to tempt young men. The object lessons become unforgettable, formative, and devastating. Chewed gum passed around a room until no one wants it. A rose stripped of petals until only a stem remains. A hammered board whose holes can never be fully repaired. A cupcake licked by the teacher offered with the question, "Who would want this now?" Girls absorb these metaphors as gospel truth. Their bodies become objects of risk. Their worth becomes precarious. Their purity becomes a currency that can be lost but never fully regained. And I'm fully aware that this is not just in the Mormon church, it's in a lot of organized religions themselves. I remember going to Sunday school as an adolescent, as a teenager, and the youth pastor holding up an orange and saying, "This is what happens if you hug somebody," and starting to squish the orange. And every time she talked about a physical act, she would further destroy the orange. And by the end of it, she was like, "So this is your heart now. Do you want to give your heart, one that looks like this, to your husband, to your partner?" And all of us were like, "Oh my gosh, no, I don't want a destroyed heart." It's this fear, this constant metaphorical fear that's instilled in young girls. Now, within the Mormon community, survivors of assault described their first reaction not as fear or anger, but as shame, a belief that they had been spiritually ruined. One woman recalled, I quote, "I knew something was wrong, but the first thing I thought was, I'm not virtuous anymore." Now, we're going to circle back and talk about Spencer W. Kimball again. You know, the guy who decided that death would be better than losing your virginity before marriage. He wrote a book called The Miracle of Forgiveness, and it was distributed widely throughout the church for decades. And it delivered a line that lodged deep into the psyche of LDS girls. It's better to die in defending one's virtue than to live having lost it without a struggle. So girls would internalize this as literal instruction. Survivors report believing that, one, surviving an assault meant that they hadn't resisted enough, that life after our word was tainted, that God viewed them as complicit to the act. Purity culture doesn't even need to say silence yourself. It simply teaches that speaking would expose your own impurity. So let's say a brave young LDS woman has been violated. She doesn't know who to turn to, but she believes that she needs to speak with her bishop because that's who she's been brought up believing will help her and support her. But when an LDS woman steps into that bishop's office, usually her very first point of disclosure, she brings with her a lifetime of internalized shame. She's already predisposed to accept blame, to soften the truth, and to confess rather than report. She then meets a bishop who has no professional training in trauma, interprets all sexual behavior primarily through that purity cultural moral lens, and is taught to focus on repentance rather than justice. And of course, is operating with a male only ecclesiastical structure that totally excludes women from confidential roles. Bishops are volunteers. They're dentists, teachers, contractors, all asked to educate the most sensitive and traumatic experiences of their congregants with no clinical or legal training. These are not the same as your pastors or your priests. They're volunteers. They become the gatekeepers. They decide whether a disclosure becomes a spiritual issue, a disciplinary issue, a police matter, or a quiet internal pastoral conversation. Now, because bishops are trained to categorize sexual activity under law of chastity, many survivors describe their disclosure as being treated like a confession. Women have reported being asked, "What were you wearing? Did you resist strongly enough? Why were you alone with him? Did you climax? Did your body respond? Have you repented?" It literally makes me sick to my stomach to think about this. Now, others would be assigned to read the miracle of forgiveness, as though the trauma of being R-word required spiritual correction. Now, these responses are not aberrations. They are the predictable outcome of a system that conceptualizes sexual harm as a moral failure rather than what it really is, an act of violence. And that places moral responsibility disproportionately on a woman's shoulders. Now, I think this is one of the most controversial and disgusting aspects of the Mormon cult, and it is the so called helpline. The cultural and ecclesiastical systems of silence converge with the church's legal apparatus at a single choke point: the 24/7 abuse helpline. This hotline is publicly described as a resource for bishops to ensure legal compliance and support victims. But in reality, it functions as a legal shield. Calls to the helpline are routed to Curtin McConkie, the church's law firm, and are immediately cloaked in attorney-client privilege. So what does this mean for the victims and survivors who speak out? It means that A, the contents of the call are legally protected, B, records cannot be subpoenaed, and C, victims cannot access the file, but also internal decisions cannot be externally reviewed. This means it all stays within the church. This so-called helpline funnels every allegation, already weakened by shame and moral framing, into a sealed system that's only designed to protect the institution itself. In some documented cases, helpline workers have said that call logs are destroyed daily. Daily. Imagine getting so many calls of SA. Like, imagine if 911 just deleted its call logs all day, every single day. This practice creates a bureaucratic void where no one can verify what advice was given, and no one can trace what patterns of or neglect a woman might be dealing with. And there's obviously no accountability that can be imposed after the fact because everything is deleted. And unfortunately, thanks to the separation of church and state in many states, clergy are not required to report disclosed sexual abuse if it occurs within a confessional context. So, when you go to your therapist and there's that client privilege, there's that privacy where they can't tell anyone your business unless you are going to harm yourself or others, and then they can go to the police. The church is like, "Oh, you just confessed to essaying someone? Well, just go repent, because if we report this to the police or the proper authorities, it'll reflect poorly on the church." It's disgusting. The church has repeatedly instructed bishops through the helpline to treat certain disclosures as confidential and not report them. The Paul Adams case in Arizona illustrates the devastating power of this system. After admitting to his bishop that he was abusing his daughter, the bishop called the helpline and was told that he could not report the confession. The abuse would continue for 7 years, expanding to another child, all the way up until federal investigators discovered it through child P investigations. And this is not an anomaly. It was the system working as designed. Now, when bishops do try to discipline, They often do so within ecclesiastical channels. They'll restrict privileges, they'll place members on probation, require confessions, or they might even excommunicate perpetrators. But this internal discipline does not protect their community. It doesn't create a criminal record. It doesn't leave a paper trail. It doesn't alert outside authorities. And it does not validate the victim's experiences. And what's worse is women are sometimes told to forgive rather than seek justice. Again, it just reinforces this silence as a spiritual virtue. Obviously, luckily, there are some allegations that will escape this system that was built to protect the church, and they will reach the legal system. Now, the church has sometimes responded with confidential settlements. So these might offer victims much needed financial support, but they also hide the public from any information. They prevent institutional transparency, and they dismantle any possibility of precedent or reform. Now, the final layer of the church trying to silence women is that even when allegations are acknowledged internally, leaders will often reinterpret them through a moral framework, like those questions we've featured before. Was she drinking? Was she alone with him? Did she break the law of chastity? Did she lead him on? This reframing converts assault into sin. It converts crime into moral lapse. And it changes a victim into a willing participant. It makes the woman's trauma not a threat to her safety, but the threat to the church's moral narrative. And this is not by accident. It's structural inevitability in a church where men judge women's purity, where women are excluded from confidential decision making, and sexuality is framed as a binary obedience of transgression. And what's funny is publicly, the LDS Church will emphasize zero tolerance for abuse and compassion for victims, and that they always cooperate with law enforcement. But privately, actual leadership manuals instruct bishops to not investigate deeply, to not involve others, to not report, and not to bypass the helpline. If you happen to be a bishop of higher moral ground and someone comes to you and says they've essayed someone or they've been essayed, and you're like, I need to report this, you're discouraged from doing that. You're discouraged from being a better person because the church is more worried about their reputation than about the safety of their church members. Now, despite the controversies that we've all seen in the show Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, we've also seen many of the women in real time deconstruct from this dangerous purity culture. We have watched some of the women pull away from the church. We've seen multiple perspectives among the different women as to their experience. We've even seen some of the women have what they called a faith crisis, where they end up deciding to leave the church. And among the last 3 seasons, the show has definitely ventured away from a lot of the Mormon practices and exploring what those habits and rituals look like, and really focusing on the lifestyle and inner workings of the women and families that are involved in Mom Talk. But as a viewer, you can't help but continue to notice this underlying patriarchal, misogynistic structure. The women consistently claim that they are smashing the patriarchy, but they behave in ways that shows that they are still submissive sometimes. And the women who have broken out of that binary way of thinking, they've started being shamed publicly for their financial success and being the breadwinner. So it starts to feel like, I'm sure, to these women that there's just no way they can win no matter what. Either you're shamed by your husband because you're emasculating him by becoming the breadwinner, or you're becoming the breadwinner. All your dreams are coming true, and people on other podcasts are shaming you because why aren't you with your children when you're at rehearsal for Dancing with the Stars or for your new Broadway show? It really feels like in society as a whole, it's almost impossible for women to win. But imagine that you are a woman brought up in this misogynistic purity culture, and you're finally starting to break out and you're uncovering all of these things and processing these things that happened to you when you were a kid at the hands of your male family members, your male spiritual leaders, or even kind of imposed upon you by other members of your community, whether they're women or men. Imagine the confusion of trying to break free of that and being subjected to all of this scrutiny because you're on a reality television show. We see it so clearly in one relationship, Michaela and her husband Jace. Now, Michaela is very open about her experience being essayed by a family member. We see her break down. We see her talk about how difficult it was because it was at the hands of a family member. And we also find out that when she was a minor, she was impregnated by her now husband when he was over the age of 18. So there's this discourse, is he a predator? And it only gets worse as he begins to pressure her into intimacy with him in the third season while she's not just pregnant, but processing the sexual trauma she experienced at the hand of her Mormon family member. We see women being stuck in toxic, abusive relationships with their husbands because they are so shamed into stepping out and leaving. And the thing that's really sad about it all is it's all clouded in a false XA accusation, allegedly, and so much controversy and drama. So, how are these? They're mostly young women in their 20s. How are they really supposed to turn into the older women, the empowered women that it seems like they really want to be if they are constantly scrutinized, constantly judged, and constantly pressured to stay in the confines of their culty religion, which, in my opinion, Mormonism is a cult. And cult experts will say that it is the largest cult in the world. So it just feels like the normalization of women being essayed, married when they're children, married when they're young, for it being their fault if they are tempting a man, it's destructive. It's inherently destructive. And it is no surprise that within a religion that there might be almost double the statistic of women being essayed in that structure than in the whole of the country. 1 in 3 is a lot more common than 1 in 5, and that number is still horrifying to hear. Where do we go from here? How do we break down these structures? Honestly, all we can do is to continue to A, talk about it, and B, we have to be better supporters of women. We have to be more understanding to women who stay in these structures, because imagine trying to break all of that down, especially if you're being scrutinized because you're on one of the most popular reality shows that has ever graced our television. And it's so easy to judge. It's so easy to make fun of the women, and it's so easy to get frustrated at the men. And it's so aggravating that the producers of the show are taking into account the men's demands over the women in the reunion and literally made all of the women leave the stage so that one man could come and lie in front of the other men. Producers of shows like this, in my opinion, need to help facilitate the mental and physical health of their cast, especially if you know that there are women who are currently breaking down the mental structure that they've known their entire lives. I just can imagine these women are in a veritable pressure cooker at this point. Anyways, I went on a bit of a tangent, bit of a rant towards the end there, but I'm really excited to hear what your perspectives are. I'm really curious if you have more knowledge than I do. I mean, of course, this is all just research I've done as someone on the outside, but if you have experience in Mormonism, if you are part of the Mormon church, I would love to hear more of your insights. I did touch on the pressure that women have to like be perfect because there's so much, plastic surgery and cosmetic procedures happening on the show, which is fine if it's something you want to do, more power to you. But if it's ingrained in this kind of like patriarchal, misogynistic structure of women being pressured to look perfect all the time for the male gaze for their men, then it becomes an issue. So I will leave all of those videos down in the description below. Please remember to support Lauren and her son this holiday season. You'll see her Amazon wish list down in the pinned comment below. And as always, please share your insights and have positive, productive discourse down in the comments below. I really appreciate all y'all's time. I hope you are staying safe out there. And remember to ask questions and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video soon. Thanks y'all so much. Bye.